Welcome to Off the Wire, the podcast that helps you curb cybersecurity risk and tackle technology challenges. I'm Tanner and I'm joined by Anthony. We're two IT executives with a combined 35 years of experience in the IT and cybersecurity field. Let's start the show. Welcome back to Off the Wire. For this episode, Anthony and I thought we'd do something a little bit different. We thought we'd go through 2024, do a year in review, talk about the technology that came to pass that really we thought was pretty neat, something maybe we implemented, talk about maybe some of the big technology headlines or cybersecurity headlines that happened in 2024, and then finish the episode talking a little bit about kind of what we're looking forward to in 2025. With being toward the end of the year, it's a good time to kind of reflect on what you've done and also look forward to what you're going to be doing. So we thought it might be a good episode and change it up a little bit to try to cover some technology stuff that we thought was pretty interesting in 2024. So first kind of section or segment here we wanted to talk about was kind of some headlines that grabbed our attention. And so Anthony, I'm going to kind of hand it off to you. I think the first thing I had on my list, and we've talked about a little bit, was this issue with CrowdStrike and what happened there.
Yeah, CrowdStrike, it wasn't a cyber attack, but it did cause a global IT outage, and it was about 8.5 million workstations and servers that were impacted. So if it was an attack, it would have been the biggest attack ever, I would imagine. So that really just opened a lot of eyes. There were people having trouble getting their pay. There were issues at the hospitals. Flights were canceled. It was just a total nightmare. I mean, it was one of the biggest incidents I've ever seen. It caused a lot of havoc across the country, across the world. And, we weren't exempt from it. We have CrowdStrike, and I can't remember the percentage, but, I'm sure it was somewhere between like 60 and 70% of our devices we had to basically get from or blue screening, and we had to manually touch. I guess that we're fortunate that we're small. I can't imagine if you had 300,000 workstations or something like that, or 30,000. We had like 100 something workstations and under 100 servers. So for three of us working in the middle of the night, we were able to get 95% of it up before 8 a.m. That was something for the large folks. Like, to me, it wasn't a huge ordeal, but for the organizations that were larger, some of them it took out for months to recover. So I can't imagine that. Yeah, I think that's the probably the biggest. I don't know if you want to call it a cyber incident, but that was one of the biggest stories cyber wise this year.
Yeah, I think it opens a lot of questions as well to security and cybersecurity software, and the fact that this software has a lot of ties into our systems. I think before, I'm thinking back to like the old days, antivirus, things like that. It could block some things, but it didn't have quite the tentacles into the system processes, monitoring those kind of things, services, monitoring the executables and what the executables are calling, and then being able to actually block all of that. I think it's definitely opened my eyes, and I'm sure it opened a lot of people's eyes to the fact that our software is becoming so integrated with how the OS runs, especially on the cybersecurity side, that any type of issue from a software vendor is going to cause us considerable pain, considerable issue. And like you said, obviously we're smaller. We at the time not using CrowdStrike, so it didn't affect us at all. But obviously there were some massive companies that had a lot of revenue kind of banked on having their systems up throughout the day. And uh, I think there was a good response from CrowdStrike on it, but definitely, definitely a huge headline. If you haven't had a chance to review, we did an episode on that, and Anthony talked about kind of the details of how they recovered, and we talked about does this open them up for liability? I think in the end it didn't, but yeah, definitely something huge. It almost feels like it was more than a year ago, but definitely happened this year. Another one on my list was Salt Typhoon. I think that one's kind of still ongoing. But basically, for those that may not be familiar, this is basically Chinese hackers that had compromised large telecoms. So you think of like the AT&Ts, Verizon, things like that, and we're actually able to figure out who people were talking to, who they were calling, when they were calling. It actually kind of made me think a little bit about a few years ago when I think the CIA had a program very similar to this. And now that another country's doing it, everybody's upset about it. But anyway, obviously they're still in these systems. A lot of it, I think, I didn't. It was taking a look, and a lot of it was just basically due to just poor cyber hygiene, especially in a lot of routers. And that just seems odd to me. I guess when you're a company that in general basically provides a network that your network equipment is not up to date. But that one's still ongoing. I just read an article, was just double checking. I think they found another telecom that had been affected, like even maybe in the last week or two. So that one's kind of a big one. Of course, other countries are denying any type of involvement as usual, but I think for those, especially those in critical infrastructure, it's a big wake up call that obviously we talked about it in the Verizon episode that most attacks are financial in nature, but doesn't necessarily mean that a country that maybe doesn't believe the way we believe or has some sort of issue or bone to pick with us doesn't mean that they're not going to try to get into our environments as well.
I'll say a little more on that. I don't think the United States is, and I'm not saying you're implying this, but the United States is definitely not innocent. If you go back to Stuxnet, where basically to stall the nuclear program for Iran, I'm sure the fingers point back to us and Israel working together. But that's something I'm glad to see that this stuff is getting more news headlines, because it's amazing the things that happen. The cyber warfare is happening every single day, and it really is not on any front pages, or in the past you'd never see it, and now it's starting to make some headlines. And I really wish that they would make more of this stuff on the news. It's super important, and all of these countries are doing things. It's the Wild West, because if you send a bomb or do something physically, there's going to be a retaliation. Well, in the cyber world, these attacks, a lot of times there is no retaliation or not much of one. It's just there's international rules, the lack of that, and a lot of times you can't definitively prove who the culprit was. So it really, anyways, this is something that it's grown, and I think it'll continue to grow. But I do appreciate the media covering this a little bit more, and I really wish that they would even go more in depth.
Yeah, definitely. We are not perfect angels, I guess, on that, like you said. And for everything, sometimes I wonder how much everything kind of that we do comes out with a good slant. Everything someone else does comes with a bad slant. I'm sure it's the reverse if you're looking at media over there. Something that affects, I think, not just us as electric utilities, but I think it affects a lot of industries or potentially might impact a lot of industries is kind of this emergence of and I'm gonna say DJI drone ban, but honestly gonna say a ban of more like Chinese technology in general. It's not just DJI drones. I think back to like the basically surveillance cameras. There's router switches. There's even phone manufacturers that are basically you're not recommended to be run on your network. So I don't know how that's gonna go. As far as the drones are concerned, obviously there's a big push to kind of ban them in the US so that for whatever believed, I guess, issue that they think they might be doing, but potentially like surveilling and sending data back or even just sending like metadata back. I think that's what the people that want to ban them think they're doing. But in reality, I think, and maybe it kind of goes to what your comment on cyber warfare. Are we getting to a point where we're no longer able to trust technology from an adversary country? Maybe we're getting closer to that. I don't know. That might be where we're headed. I know, like I said, I mentioned some of those other things that are, I guess, at the very least, not recommended on your networks. We talked, I don't know if we talked about it, but in the news, the TP Link, it's been a big issue with TP Link on the like backdoors in their equipment. And I wonder if we're getting to a point where it's, do we trust equipment coming from other countries?
One thing that comes to mind is COVID. It really, I don't think this is the direction they're going in, but this is one of the things that I do think about. So with COVID, the all the stuff that we didn't make over here and we were unable to get, and like with drones, like I love DJI. Like I've had DJI drones. We use them at work. I don't think anyone makes a better drone, honestly, for the dollar, which is unfortunate. But, like, with COVID, us not making things, one of those things that we do make some drones, but, the China has the market on drone technology, and that's really scary when you look at what's going on, as far as, like, overseas. all the drone attacks and stuff like that. Like a lot of that stuff is a lot of the material comes from China. So the one thing if they do something like this, I really just hope that our country can start manufacturing some of these things, and so we get some of this technology and have the ability to produce quality products like they can produce. But especially with the drones, that's one of those things where, you know, with a drone, you may spend somewhere between 500 to $5,000 for a drone and can do massive damage. And like right now, like our current plan as a country is to shoot a 500,000 to $5 million missile at it. We can't keep that up. So we really need to, and I know there's some companies that are doing drone work, but really just as a whole, I think it'd be better for our country to step up in that realm.
Yeah, I think it's a good balance. Obviously, we're not gonna be the best at everything, but can we do a little bit better job so that we don't run into issues like we ran into in COVID? I think, yeah, I think that makes sense. Anthony, any headlines that you wanted to bring up that kind of really struck you this year?
Just outside that, the TikTok one that has I've seen a lot of people debate, and I'm really surprised. I've not spent much time on TikTok, but a lot of my older friends and family, they're on TikTok and, rely on it heavily from I've seen talks from investing to some of the news, the underground news that they get from TikTok. I think you need to take that with a grain. I think anything you get off social media, you need to take with a grain of salt, but I've seen some things that turned out to be true. So, but that's a big one. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of social media. Like, I'm not saying I don't use it. I do use social media, but I try not to spend a whole lot of time on that. But them trying to ban TikTok, I think that's a big thing, and I don't know how it's going to end up, or is it going to be bought out by an American company, or will they actually ban it? I don't know, but TikTok, especially, I mentioned some of the older folks are using it, but a lot of the kids like that's their favorite thing.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I mean, I think I don't know, I can definitely go either way. Obviously, you don't want if there's proven, I guess, issue with it, then I understand, but if it's basically scattered evidence at best, I think it's kinda one of those things where it's, better just to monitor things and let things be. So we'll kinda see how that goes down. So kinda moving on to and I think I'm kinda really excited about this segment here, is talking about, like, technology that really wowed us or surprised us or for the whatever reason, like, really took a jump or, anything like that, and me and you were talking before the show started, and I think it's gotta start with AI. Obviously, we've had AI before 2024, but just the emergence of generative AI, especially into the workflow of, like, the average employee. At this point, we have employees, all levels of employee using that, all positions of employee, well, maybe not all, but, like, a lot of different positions using generative AI on, at the very least, a weekly basis, but a lot of times more like a daily basis, and I think it's really gonna change the game. I'm not one of those people that believes it'll kinda take over the world, but I do think it's gonna really change how we do things at work.
Yeah, artificial intelligence is definitely grown, and I think there's a little bit of a lag. A lot of the vendors that we use, they're not. Some of them are using it, but a lot of them aren't. But I think that everyone is looking into it at the very least. So I do expect to see a lot more vendors that we currently use to dip their toes into the AI world. And just one thing that happened to me this last weekend, we went and looked at some Christmas lights, and afterwards we went to Bojangles. And I'm used to at McDonald's, you get the recording, like, "Would you like to use our mobile app today?" Well, I went up to Bojangles and I heard some kinda automated voice. It was clear, concise, and understandable, but I didn't say anything for a little bit because I thought it was just waiting to turn it over to a real person. Well, no, that was actually it's called Bolinda, and it's a AI voice that actually takes your order. I have a hard time hearing and going through the drive-through, just when you take in people's accent and everything, um, sometimes people mumble. Like I have I have a hard time at the drive-through. Using Bolinda at Bojangles was awesome, and that allows all the employees there to focus on making the food and stuff like that. Anyways, it wasn't. It's a little thing, but that's something I think you're going to see across the world. People are going to start integrating Some of these mundane tasks and stuff like that, these simple tasks, why not use AI to help augment that? So I think we're going to see a lot more come with that.
Yeah, I heard someone say, like, "Want AI to do my laundry." I was maybe eventually we get to a point where that happens, but I think the integration of AI as well into other products that we're already using is gonna be pretty powerful. It's already starting to be powerful. We've started doing some testing around the offerings from Microsoft, and man, there's some power there when you talk about being able to look through your files, your emails, your chats, all those kinds of things. Just a few kinda cool uses I've seen, something like preparing you for a meeting, basically, like, going back and looking at all the different emails that have gone back and forth and kinda giving you a summary, you're getting ready to walk into this meeting to help you out there. Something I used a while back is I thought I had emailed a vendor, and I thought I was waiting on something from them, and anyone that's used Outlook search knows if you need to find something really specific, you just good luck with that, but I was able to ask, "Hey, didn't I email such and such vendor this, and have they ever sent me back a response?" And it found where I had asked for a question, it saw that there was no responses and was able to come back. I think that's gonna continue to kind of flourish, this integration, and not just all, Microsoft products, but, all products, where there's AI that's, like, enhancing whatever we're doing. So I'm excited to see kinda where that goes. I think there was quite a lot of that this year already.
Yeah, so for AI, there's several use cases. I regularly use it. I used to have a couple people that would proofread for me. That's a thing of the past. I think like ChatGPT and those other tools, like you can't get a better proofreader. We use it for the podcast to help summarize. Basically, we get the transcription and we can summarize the show notes and stuff like that. But our marketing department, they use it heavily. There's just a whole lot of uses. The data analytics side is really awesome. Like, there's no way that a person can analyze data as quickly as, AI can. So that's something that's if you haven't done it, you wanna I would definitely recommend putting a data set in and see what it can do. It's pretty amazing. It can point out anomalies, it can point out trends. Anyways, it's something else to see it analyze a data set.
Yeah, and I wanted to kinda cover the flip side of it too, because I do think we're kinda and maybe this is kind of getting a little ahead of ourselves in 2025 and onward, but I do think we are coming to kind of a decision point on, power usage. So I did a little bit of looking. I'd heard some pretty crazy stats, wanted to kind of verify that, but I think there is some big cons around power usage that, we're starting to see a little bit of the disadvantage of, but for example, you got 10 times the power usage in an AI query than a Google search. So you think about that, all this Google searches we've all done, it ends up being about 4 cents per query. So if you think about that, I mean, basically, if you look at the average use or the average, like, I guess, plan, it's usually like about $20 a month for OpenAI's first level at least. That's really only 500 queries. I mean, I've sat there and probably done 15, 20 queries in like 5 minutes before trying to trying to tweak something down or something like that. So are we getting to a point where one, is it actually going to be conceivable to be as cheap as it is? Not sure. Long term. One thing I also thought was pretty neat, just ChatGPT. So this doesn't include the Groks, the Meta models, the Gemini, all that stuff. Just OpenAI's ChatGPT can power 21,000 homes for a year. So just the power usage and only ChatGPT is 21,000 homes, their power usage for the whole year. So pretty wild. In 2022, it was AI was 2% of the power usage in the entire world. So I know that might sound like, oh, 2%, that's nothing. 2% of anything in power usage world is like pretty big deal. And that was in 2022. And obviously in 2024, we just talked about how the acceleration happened. So I think there's some limitations from on the GPU side of things. I was looking at some manufacturing limitations that NVIDIA has on how many GPUs they can actually produce per year. There were some people that were talking about in the future, the more AI is used per person, the potential to get to a point where like you need a GPU per person on Earth. So I think there's a huge inrush of like capability that we all of a sudden got. But I will say, like, at the same time, and I'm gonna save a little bit of this for later, but at the same time, it kinda came and it's here and we're using it and we're figuring out cool ways to do it, but it's not like it also, like, just, you know, jumped itself again. I know there were several promises, from some of the big, technology leaders on new models coming out this year that maybe haven't happened yet. So, I think there is maybe they're running into some of these things as well. It's just we are running into some limitations of what we can do, but obviously a total game changer in every way. It's starting to get pushed to devices. As you said, there's people from all ages and groups, using this. I think I'm excited to see where it's gonna go as well. A couple smaller ones I wrote down. Obviously, AI was just so huge for this year. Mm, a lot of vendors, we've seen this over the past maybe like 5 to 8 years, but it's not stopping. Vendors are continuing to move off of perpetual licensing and eliminating perpetual licensing and moving toward an OpEx, operating expense model. I had another vendor do this to us basically like last week, pretty prominent vendor actually, and basically saying that, hey, they still offer it, but in the future they're going to go away from it. Microsoft set this trend. It's been a few years back now, especially with Office and those kinds of things. And I think it's just continuing to move that way. We're getting to a point where we're just leasing software, and I don't really see that stopping because I think it's just a better model financially for these companies.
Yeah, VMware was the one in the back of everyone's mind that changed that up, but yeah, we're seeing it more and more. It's just, continuous. Pretty soon you won't own anything. It feels like a IT realm. I mean, there's some hardware that we have in our racks. Technically, we don't own it. Now, granted, would they take the device back? No, they wouldn't, but basically they would de-support it, which is good as making it dead. So even the equipment, we still own our servers, but there's a lot of devices that if we don't pay that yearly or monthly fee, they're of no use to us.
Yeah, that's a good point with like the end of support. Even though you've bought the device, you feel like you do own it. It's sitting there. If they stop providing security patches for it, I mean, how long are you going to run that in a production environment? Probably not very long. I mean, we're not going to do that. I'm sure you guys wouldn't do that, and there's probably plenty of others that would follow that same process. So, are we kind of leasing the hardware on 8-year cycles? Maybe. I guess we get to keep it, but how good is it after that 8 years? We'll see.
One thing that did catch me off guard is looking at some of the routing and switching equipment, even going to that model. So really just everything we touch, I feel eventually is gonna go to that model for the most part.
Yeah, it's definitely coming, and I mean, I've yet to found that model, be beneficial for the end user, so we'll see. I don't think it's gonna
Yeah.
change, but one other thing I thought about is hybrid cloud. I know there's been a lot of talk about cloud, a lot of people going public cloud, a lot of people are like, "No, I'm not going anything cloud." I don't know, I don't wanna be, like, the early saying this before it happens, but it feels like hybrid cloud is kinda winning. I don't think anyone is like there are companies that are going both fully on-prem still and people that are fully in the cloud, no doubt about that, but I think with the majority of large companies, medium-sized companies, and maybe even, like, down into the smaller sized companies, I think hybrid cloud is winning out. It seems like it's the best of both worlds. Pick the areas where cloud makes sense, the areas that it doesn't make sense, keep on premise. I think also I actually heard I was talking with a friend, this week, and he works at a larger company, and they were talking about how some of the stuff they had in public cloud, they're actually moving back on-prem, so and I think I'm not saying that it's gonna like, we're going making a huge kind of move back to on-prem. I think it's just exactly what I said earlier, where if it makes sense and, like, it made sense in the cloud for a time, and maybe it doesn't make sense in the cloud anymore.
Yeah, the cloud, it's one of those things in theory, like, at the beginning, I think this is the way people thought early on was it's more efficient, more cost effective for Microsoft to run a big server farm and run all of our stuff over there, but the problem is all these organizations, they have stockholders and they need money, they need revenue for, and, do quarterly dividends and stuff like that, so I think that unfortunately, I think capitalism has kind of ruined the dream that it's gonna be more efficient for these big data centers to run everything. We take a blended approach like most organizations where it fiscally makes sense, or technically makes sense, will go either way.
Mm.
And yeah, I think hybrid is the way to go. The only thing is if you were able to, and we covered this in our episode, but just if you're able to push everything into the cloud, you could cut savings on a lot of hardware and infrastructure you have.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to do that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of legacy apps too that are also kind of making that a little bit of a tougher choice too if you wanted to push full cloud. But I wrote this one down. I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on it, Anthony. Are communications changing? One thing I've noticed is, and it's not severe, but I think it is changing like kind of more broadly when we talk about like different generations. But I think we're moving toward less voice communications. See a lot of like, I know I've noticed a lot less phone calls between people, and even I think email maybe has seen its peak. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe that's a little early, but it seems like communications are moving toward. Obviously, there's still video. I think that's a big thing, but I think mainly it's like chat. I think I've seen it as we've implemented internal chat. I think a lot of things that would have been email are now becoming chat. I'm seeing
Mhm.
not a drastic reduction in email, but I think a noticeable one. I don't know if you would agree with that in your, space or not.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this from the company I work at externally and internally. So externally, our members or customers, you're seeing them transition from mail and face to face to using some of the automation, whether it be just using our mobile app or paying by text, or but it's just you're seeing that trend. And also, I remember when we rolled out Microsoft 365, one of the things I was just so happy about was rolling out Teams. I came from an organization uh, previously where we use Skype, and we use it extensively. We're definitely seeing people communicate more over Teams, and just me thinking aloud with my email, and I'm sure there's a lot of other people in this. I just get so much email every single moment that with at least with the chat, like, there's only certain organizations that can communicate with us and internally, and if someone needs to get my immediate attention, they need to send a chat message, because if it goes to my inbox, I'm getting hundreds, if not thousands of emails every single day, and it really can become a task just going through that. So I really, I see myself migrating, really away from email to chat for a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned something there, and I kinda have a theory. Like, communication, we tend to move away, from where the vendors contact us. And this might be upsetting to some vendors, but if you look at, like, I think in just the public setting, email obviously is getting inundated with, sales and all that, and, like, what has happened, right? All these vendors are now trying to move toward text, right? Because texting was kind of the hiatus where it's like, we could move to this SMS world, and it was just the people we wanted to talk to, right? And it wasn't a lot of, like, advertisements, stuff like that, but obviously that's changing, and some of that is preference. People, they just prefer not to check their email, so, hey, if there's a sale at a particular site they like, sure, send me a text, right? And some of that I think is vendors doing their due diligence and trying to move to where the people are, and so I wonder if some of that chat as well internally, at least in organizations, internal chat, whether that's Teams or Slack or anything else, of some of that is just moving away from that place that's kind of intermixed, where you have like business information and third party information, and kind of narrowing it down to your point on just people that need to talk to you, other companies that you work with on a close basis, colleagues, and then of course the people internal to your company. So I don't know if that, based on that, that train of thought, I guess, does that mean that Teams is next, Slack is next? You
Yeah.
figure out how they can Slack you or, Teams you message you if they're a vendor, I'm not sure, but
Well, that just made me think of a couple things, and I'm not sure if you do this, but there's a couple vendors that we communicate with Teams. They're not salesy, and if they ever did, we'd hopefully block them. But it's nice being able to communicate with a vendor and just get straight to the point. And that, and if you have an email, you can wait. It can really, it's just inefficient to go back and forth on an email, where with a chat, you can do it pretty quickly. And also, I'm just thinking about of the vendors that we use. The vendor that provides the best support of all the vendors that we use, they use a chat client to for their support channel. And anyways, I'm just thinking about it. Like I do think I think eventually something might supersede chat, but for right now, I really think it's going to continue to grow. But unfortunately, as it grows, we're seeing attackers trying to get into it and abuse it.
Yeah, we haven't used it a ton with vendors, but we would definitely be open to with certain vendors, absolutely not, but certain vendors, yeah, I think I'm kinda with you on that. The really good ones, I think, could take advantage of that technology. Another one I wrote down, and obviously, I think this is more it's hit home a little bit more with me, obviously, in our area, getting, the Helene impact, is Starlink. I mean, we've had Starlink for many years as a technology, but I think this is probably one of those years where it really, like it really I kinda thought, "Okay, this is good. People that live, like, far enough out and need an internet, option, sure, that's a great thing for them." But, for us that have access to cable or cellular or any of that stuff, like, this is something that's just not really needed. And I was really proven wrong this year. I never realized, I guess, how fragile, landline communications are. I mean, when you can be impacted by weather or even something as simple as a car hitting a pole or something like that, it's pretty fragile. To see fiber optic networks be pretty much brought to their knees, cellular networks be offline, and to have a network that's not based on any of that to work perfectly and to allow communication in areas where communication was non-existent. It was just really impressive to me. I guess I knew about the technology. I was impressed by it, but, like, I think we got, like, a really great real world test this year. Obviously, I know they've been using it in Ukraine as well in the war zone there, but just for it to be so close to home, it really it was just bigger in my mind.
Yeah, I talked with a vendor and had a really great conversation. This is something we're not gonna do it in 2025, but very interested in long term looking at is coupling Starlink with SD-WAN. I think that could be a really powerful tool. And also, if you look at what a circuit can cost, really, it's not that bad of a solution financially if you need some kind of backup solution to look at that. So I think there's something there coupling it with SD-WAN.
Yeah, I think we're kinda just scratching the surface on how it's gonna be used, at least at the very least as a backup, and honestly, I don't know, my neighbors, they, they bought a Starlink and because they got it free being in the hurricane area, and they were like, "If it works really well, we might just stay with this. That way we don't have to worry about it next time," and I thought, "Well, that's if you can get pretty similar performance, I don't that's a pretty good thought." The last one I really had in this category, and you may have some, as well, but, was the inroads that Zero Trust made, this year. We talked about Zero Trust on an episode, and it's been around for a long time, but at least in our world, at least, I think the medium-sized business, honestly, up until maybe a year, maybe 2 at the most, I didn't hear a lot of discussion about it, and now it feels like everything is discussing that. I mean, it's like, "Oh, is that architected with Zero Trust? Is that" it seems like maybe it's just easier to understand, I guess, versus, like, cyber hygiene and, like, all the different rules of cyber hygiene. It just Zero Trust really, like, takes all of that and makes it into like, a nice little package. And maybe it's because we're moving things to the cloud and now we've got a bunch of different arenas we're trying to secure, but it feels like people are talking about that a lot more and maybe trying to architect Zero Trust into their new technology they're deploying.
Yeah, coming from a DoD background, like I had the defense in depth that was instilled in me, and I know that zero trust has been out there, but I wish it would have took a hold before. With bring your own devices and people working remotely, there is no perimeter, so zero trust totally makes sense these days. Basically, just treat everything like it's connected to the internet. As far as security wise goes, it makes total sense. And anyways, it's a change in thought and we're getting there. And honestly, I wish I would have started looking into that before, but definitely, it's gonna it's gonna make some changes with how we do things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of moving on to 2025, and we wanted to kind of wrap up the episode talking about 2025 and what we're looking forward to. And we're not gonna go super in depth here, but just some quick things that we're looking forward to from a technology perspective. Anything like 2025, what's on the list of like things maybe you're implementing or maybe wanting to research more or things that maybe technology you think's going to kind of explode in 2025 that you're kind of excited about?
Well, one, I'm a very competitive guy, and Tanner was talking about building the AI server, so I got to digging into it, and honestly, it makes total sense because we're it's really one of those things that you say constantly, Tanner, is if you don't provide a tool for your end users, they're going to go find their own tool. Well, that's already happened. Like we've got people that have their own chat GPT. subscriptions, and we've told them what they can and can't put. But if you think people aren't putting stuff out there that they shouldn't, I guarantee you got a rude awakening. We're looking at the Meta's Llama, and we're not going to go. We're kind of doing a DIY system. I'm going to do. I've got a AMD Threadripper. I've got a motherboard that's got 512 gig of RAM. I got the motherboard and processor and everything off eBay. Now we're ordering. We've got one 3090 in that has 24 gig of VRAM, and I can put up to I think six on the motherboard combo that I've got, doing like a open rack design. But anyways, we're wanting to do a basically have an internal AI that people can use with the data that they shouldn't be putting into like ChatGPT or Claude or whatever platform that they're using. And I think it's just going to be good for our folks to learn, and also just digging into it, like looking at it. These things are so power hungry. It is insane. It's basically like a Bitcoin mining server. I mean, that's basically what you're building. It could do either way. Uh, and just looking at it, we bought for the power supply. I got a 1600-watt power supply. That thing is so heavy, and that's needed to run the video cards. I mean, and if they were all running at 100%, like the 1600-watt power supply wouldn't even do it for 4 3090s. So that's just, unfortunately, the technology out there is they can't use 100% across the board right now, but they'll get there to where they can. But anyways, we're looking forward to having that internally and finding some good use cases with that.
Yeah, we're obviously looking at the same thing. I'm not sure. We're maybe looking for a potential route through one of the Dells or the HPs of the world, but haven't rolled out anything really. But yeah, I think for us, we started looking at, especially as we were talking about budgets this year, and looking at like cloud options for AI and what and on-premise options, and again, kind of going back to our hybrid cloud. I think that's kind of where we're going to land. There are some things where using cloud AI offerings are way better in some ways, but obviously it can get really expensive really quickly, especially if you're doing a lot of data ingress, kind of like most other public cloud tools, and depending on how many calculations you're doing, obviously. A lot of that's just that power that I talked about earlier. So we're also looking at a local AI model, maybe something. I don't know if we're going to use it in lieu of like an LLM, but maybe doing some more really specific use cases. We got some use cases around like doing some modeling, some power modeling, and modeling for demand response and when we need to implement demand response. Demand response is basically for those that may not be in the power spaces, lowering our demand at peak periods so that we can obviously save money. Some other things we're kind of looking at, a simple language query, or basically the ability for users to kinda put a prompt in just like they would ChatGPT and have it to basically analyze a database and provide them with the data, right? And to Anthony's point, you can't really do that unless you're able to basically put your data into the model, right? One of the things that we really love is the documentation that we've created as a company, right? There's a lot of internal documentation to help people that are on the phone answer the public's questions a lot quicker, but it could be even faster, with maybe like an AI assistant on top of that. So that's something we're looking into as well. Basically, someone that's read all the documentation and knows it at the very quickly, they can just recall what it is. And there's some other ones as well. But yeah, we're excited about that. And oh man, when you gonna get down that road, especially if you look at some of the video cards, I mean, you can get some pretty pricey machines depending on. I think we were looking at kind of the top of the line video card I think NVIDIA has is I think it's 192 gig of VRAM and it's like 80 grand. So it's in one card though. But yeah, it's obviously we're not going to be doing something like that. But taking a look at some of the open source models, like you were saying, the Llama model, I think the top end Llama model requires 170 gigs of VRAM. And there's obviously smaller models and um, trying to figure out, do a little testing. I think that's part of sometimes we get, I don't know, in IT, we get so bogged down with like what's prescriptive that we don't take any time to just like learn and see what's out there and maybe just like just piddle on things. I don't know, for lack of a better word, to try to see. Maybe it doesn't work out, maybe it does, but I think we do need to leave ourselves some time to try to research solutions and see if there's something we can offer people there.
Yeah, I just wanna touch on a couple things that you mentioned, like and I know this is specific to our industry, but the demand response, and I don't know about Tanner's organization, but for us, the demand usage is so for a power company, it typically between 60 and 70%, the total cost is really just buying the power itself if that you resell. Like all the labor and all the poles and transmission and distribution line, it's really a small item in the bucket. Just the cost of buying power is very expensive. And for us, the of that cost, say 70% of our cost is buying power. Well, half of that is the peak demand that we have to pay for. So if you could use AI to analyze that data and shave a percent or two off, you're talking significant money. I mean, so that's something that could be really powerful and very cost effective tool. A couple other things that we've seen is, and we've discussed it and we're looking into it, is being able to analyze the calls, and the transcription from the calls, and look at that. And the other thing, and this is one I'm hoping our vendor moves to, and I've had several discussions with them. But we have a chat client, but it doesn't do a whole lot. And I remember they asked her like, "Well, what would you like it to do?" And I'm like, basically anything a member service representative could do. So not just take a payment, tell your payment amount. Basically, like be able to scrape your website, your service rules, your bylaws to know all that information. And if someone wants to update their contact information, be able to do that. Like there's so many things, these routine tasks that, AI that we could use it to make our folks more effective. And even from a IT perspective, we've got some people that do code and stuff like that. These AI models can help augment almost any position. We're really just at the beginning of this. There's so many use cases out there. I think that's the hard part right now is really finding these use cases and applying them.
I read an article about kind of like the CIO's guide to implementing AI. It was actually a report that IBM put out, big white paper. But one of the things that it talked about is, to your point, it's not something you can just like completely go in every direction on, right? Because it's overwhelming. I mean, the ability for what AI can do and like in every potential area of your company is there. I mean, there's some benefit that it can have in almost every area, but you really have to look down. And that's really why we kind of created a use case list is we did interviews and we tried to determine like what is taking the most time and what could provide the most value. And we're trying to just focus on those and having that be in a small list, like 6 to 8 use cases, and not something that. And I think a lot of people will say, well, a use case, yeah, that's something we can do in like a month. I mean, that's not the way it is. It's going to take, these are big, kind of big goals to have. So we're looking at those. And I think that's a good way to kind of settle yourself around the strategy for your company around AI is to look at use cases and kind of build around those. If you look at it from like a total perspective of everything AI can do, I think you're either going to be spinning your wheels or you're going to be going in so many different directions that you're just going to it's gonna become unmanageable, I guess, at some point. But at the same time, to your earlier point, and what I usually say is you also gotta listen to the users because their needs are really gonna dictate what they look for, and as an IT group, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to support the users and provide them the technology they need. So I think a lot of that is just keeping a really close ear to the ground about what is needed and, not just around budget time, very, monthly, maybe even more often than monthly. I heard someone, I had a leader, a mentor talk to me, and they said sometimes they learned a lot by just walking around the halls and just having conversations. And I think as IT folks, we tend to want to, I don't know, not do that. I don't know if it's just something that's built in our personalities, but that's something we should be doing is listening to people and determining what they need and trying to build use cases and trying to build technology around that. So obviously, have your use cases that you maybe get and do some interviews, things like that to get that, but also be a bit willing to be flexible too, because technology is changing quickly and you may have to adjust your use cases.
This is just a suggestion. And typically, in any time we're looking at any technology, I'm like, what's the use case? And that's one of these. where with this, we don't really have a huge use case for AI, but we've done this in the past. So we use a low code product, and I saw the power in it, and I didn't really get a use case. And that the people that were doing the demo with me, they really weren't too impressed. They're like, "Well, this isn't applicable," and I was like, I was looking at it from just the beauty of the tool. The tool could do anything that we want, and we could do it ourselves internally with just because it's low code. And so we brought that product on and we found one use case and kind of rolled it out. And then once we rolled it out, everyone's like, "Oh wow, it can do this and it does it really well." And then like that really just got people thinking, and we're getting bombarded now with use cases, and honestly, we can't keep up. Matter of fact, we outsourced some of the work just because there's such a demand now. And that's one of those things where I'm hoping, with the when we get this AI tool, that we can come up with a use case that'll impact just in some way a lot of the end users or a lot of people at the organization, and kind of just get the juices flowing, and that'll start getting them thinking about all the different ways that we can utilize this technology.
Yeah, and I hope for kind of one of the things I'm looking forward to is hopefully some more progress in some of these things too, because there's been so much money put into AI. It's almost a little like fragmented. It seems like there's like we've mentioned like 5 different companies at OpenAI, the Claude model, Gemini. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones, but and I think it's gonna happen like that. There's just gonna be an explosion. I think back to like flash storage. That was the one of the things that really reminded me a little bit of this. When flash storage came on the scene, I went to a VMworld conference and there was like 45 vendors of flash storage. And then about 4 years later, I went again and there were like 10 vendors of flash storage. And so some of these there's a lot of like there's a really cool AI company that basically can like read your whole website and basically just give you a chat bot for your site based on what's on your website. And I hope a lot of these companies make it. I'm not saying they all won't, but there's definitely gonna be consolidation at some point as well. Everybody's putting investment into it to try to be like the next big thing, and obviously that's not everyone can be the next big thing, so there'll be some consolidation as well. And there for all the, benefit and the kind of amazement the AI brings, it still gets a lot of stuff wrong. I don't know how if you really especially if you get, like, technical into it. I mean, if you're just doing, you know, more simple things like generating emails or generate responses, things like that. Does really well at that. But if you get really technical, like you're needing it to help you write a script or something like that, you definitely like definitely can fall on its face a little bit as well. So I'm hoping that there's more improvement there. But I'm kind of brought back to a quote, and I looked to see who was the person to speak this quote. It's been attributed to multiple people. But the quote is, most people overestimate what they can achieve in a year and underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years. And I think that's kind of how AI is going to go. Like in 10 years, I think we're going to look back and be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe like all that we're doing with this. But in any one year, maybe 25 is that year where we're like, we get to the end and we're like, well, we kind of were doing the same stuff as 2024. And maybe some of those things like the power, the ability to manufacture GPUs, like maybe those are some of our stumbling blocks and it takes us a while to get over that hump. But I do think I hope there's more progress, but I do think maybe we need to temper our expectations as well, because for all that has come out with AI, there's a long, way to go, and, it's not all gonna happen overnight.
So moving from AI, the other thing that comes to mind for 2025 is really just further implementation. I guess really just of zero trust, and building out our tool sets that we already have, existing tool sets. I know there's a lot of organizations that are looking to cut their budget, and we're one where we're just trying to do a little bit more with less. And we've got all these different tools, and we're not 100% fully leveraging all of them. And so we're looking to just further develop these tool sets, and we're using the CIS framework. And that's just one of those things. It's not something you're just going to go from not doing anything to having it rolled out in a year. This is just one of those things. It's a long term plan, and we're just looking forward to making further progress with that.
Yeah, I kinda agree with that too. I think that really could apply to every technology we have, but I think we get a lot of technology, and as technology people, we wanna just add additional technologies and systems, but in reality, some time needs to be spent on trying to optimize what you have, because sometimes we learn, especially in cybersecurity world, we're like, "Oh, we didn't know our tool could do that." And maybe it saves us a little bit of money on another tool. In fact, we're doing that kinda right now, with our SIM, with them having, like, basically a network monitoring tool that we didn't know they had, and it does cost a little bit more, but it's not as much as a dedicated network monitoring tool, so it's something we're looking into, so well, Anthony, I think, we had a pretty good review here talking about a lot of AI talk. Obviously, AI has dominated 2024. It's, gonna dominate a lot of 2025, so if you're listening and you just absolutely hate AI, I think you might be in for another rough year from just in general. There's just gonna be a lot of discussion about it. But there's a lot of other things we mentioned too, and, we're curious to hear maybe what, our listeners think as well. So, as this episode comes out, if you have something that we didn't cover that you think's really gonna pop off in 2025, like I said, shoot us an email maybe or hit us up on social media where we post it and, continue the discussion there. As always, we really appreciate all of our, listeners. We really enjoy doing this. I enjoy kinda getting together and talking with Anthony, and I've learned a lot, doing the podcast. We really appreciate you listening, and we're definitely always up for feedback, so if you have an idea for an episode or if you think we got something wrong, just hit us up on, like I said, social media, or you can email us at show@offthewire.podcast. We release every other Monday, as always, and until next time, this is another episode of Off the Wire.
Thank you, everyone.